Hello, I'm Dr. Albanese with Albanese Chiropractic, and our mission is to help as many families as possible create healthy lifestyles and reach optimal health through chiropractic. Today's video is all about carbohydrates and gaining a better understanding of carbohydrates by evaluating the glycemic index or glycemic load of a carbohydrate food. Now, unfortunately, so many people are carbophobic. They're afraid of carbohydrates and the impact that they may have on their blood glucose levels, their ability to lose weight, and causing them to gain weight. Because we kind of lump all carbohydrates together and say they all must do the same thing because they're carbohydrates. But unfortunately, this is just not the case. Carbohydrates are very different and they interact with your body very differently. So, for a long time, we used to look at carbohydrates and say, well, it's either a simple carbohydrate or a complex carbohydrate. Now, today, we know that's a very inaccurate and very antiquated way to evaluate carbohydrates. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive into glycemic index and glycemic load to help you have a better understanding as to how carbohydrates affect not only your blood glucose levels, but your ability to maintain a healthy diet and healthy weight. In 1997, Dr. Jenkins and researchers at the University of Toronto published a paper to help explain something they called glycemic index, which is how fast the carbohydrate food is converted to blood glucose, blood sugar. Now, this is very important, and we've heard glycemic index used quite a bit, and it's much more publicized than a more accurate way to depict how high blood glucose levels will get when we eat carbohydrate foods. This is something called glycemic load. And in 1997, Harvard researchers experimented on using glycemic index, but also taking into consideration a portion size of a carbohydrate and determining how high blood glucose levels will get. And this, again, is a much more accurate way to evaluate carbohydrates and their effect on blood glucose levels. So let's take a look at the differences between these two ways of rating carbohydrates so you have a better understanding as to why glycemic load is much more accurate. First, we'll look at the scale that is used for glycemic index. Glycemic index is rated at 55 and lower for low. A moderate glycemic index is 56 to 69, and a high glycemic index food is anything above 70. Now, glycemic load is rated from a scale to below 10 is considered low, from 11 to 19 is considered moderate, and high glycemic load is anything above 20. So let's take a look at individual foods to help you understand these scales. Now, for this example, I'll use fruits and vegetables because this is very commonly misunderstood when looking at how a carbohydrate is rated. So let's take a look at fruits. Now, we'll look at bananas. Bananas have a glycemic index of 51, but only a low glycemic load of 13. Now, watermelon has a very high glycemic index of 76, which means it's converted to blood glucose very quickly, but it only affects blood glucose levels by a rating of glycemic index of 4. So it's a very low impact on blood glucose levels. Pineapple has a glycemic index of 66, but a very low glycemic load of 6. Same thing for mango. Mangoes have a glycemic index of 60, but a very low glycemic load of 9. Cantaloupe has a very high glycemic index rating of 68, but a glycemic load of 4. So we can see how these fruits really have a very small impact on increasing blood glucose levels. Even though they're converted to blood glucose quickly, they don't raise blood glucose levels. Let's take a look at some vegetables and go through the same comparison. So the first vegetable we'll look at are carrots. Have a glycemic index of 37, but only a glycemic load of 2. For red potatoes that are boiled, they have a glycemic index of 89 and a glycemic load of 19. Pumpkins that are boiled have a glycemic index of 66 and a glycemic load of 12. Butternut squash and green peas both have a glycemic index of 51, but have very low glycemic loads, 3 and 4. Now again, these two different scales, glycemic index, would show that these fruits and vegetables have high or moderately high glycemic indexes, which would mean we might want to veer away from them. But in reality, the actual effect they have on blood glucose levels is very low, as depicted by the glycemic load of these foods. So a more accurate way to evaluate your carbohydrates is through glycemic load. Now, let's take a look at a couple things that are very important to understand when looking at glycemic index or glycemic load. And that's what can actually influence these fruits and vegetables or any carbohydrate. Number one, cooking or heating a carbohydrate will automatically increase the glycemic load and glycemic index of a food. So it's better to eat fruits and vegetables in a more raw state. Now, also, juicing fruits and vegetables will increase the glycemic load and index because you make it easier for that carbohydrate to be digested and broken down and affect blood glucose. Whereas if you were to, say, eat an apple or drink apple juice, a whole apple has fiber and you have to break that down and it takes longer. So it's not going to have a big spike in glycemic load or blood glucose. It'll take a more gradual approach to affect it because you have to do more work to break it down. Whereas apple juice gets into your system very quickly. So eating a food, especially fruit and vegetable, in a more natural state will have a lower impact on blood glucose levels. So heating or cutting up a food, anything you do to make it easier to digest that food will have a more increased level or impact on blood glucose levels. So it's better to eat a food in a more natural state. For example, when I cook my vegetables, I heat the vegetables just enough to make them a little bit soft. And that is certainly changing blood glucose levels, but only very small, a very small incremental change that won't affect blood glucose that much. But the more you cook, the more you heat, the more you process or refine carbohydrates, the greater the impact on blood glucose levels. So it's better to eat a food in a more natural state, unrefined, than a refined carbohydrate. Anything in a box or a can is going to be processed, it's going to be refined. So it's going to have a greater impact on blood glucose levels, hence a higher rating for both glycemic index and glycemic load. So eating a food, any food, in a more natural state is going to be healthier. It will also keep that food intact, and it will cause your body to have to break down the fiber and work harder and have less impact on blood glucose. So I hope this video was helpful for you to better understand and evaluate carbohydrates. Utilize glycemic load as your index, and that will give you a more clear depiction as to how this carbohydrate food is going to impact your health and your blood glucose levels. So we hope that you share this video with others. Visit our YouTube station, like and subscribe to our videos. And again, we hope that this helps you to create a more healthy diet. The next few videos, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into carbohydrates, explaining what refined and unrefined carbohydrates are, processed and unprocessed foods, how that has an impact on your health, as well as an impact on weight loss and weight gain. So I'm Dr. Albanese. Until we see you again, have a great day and be well.